going to have one item of business, but I'm going to give a little bit of an explanation at the beginning. We have entertained two bills in two chambers of the legislature this year. Senate Bill 194 is coming through to us, and it is very similar to HB 2282. We're going to have an informational hearing on today. Informational because we're not going to take official action on HB 2282, but we will be taking official action hopefully on Wednesday on SB 194. It's come through the full chamber of the Senate, and it is coming to us. So our actions, as far as we know, in the next couple of days of business are to hear this informational hearing, which will be the broadcast of what the layout of these two bills is. And then we'll have the opportunity on Wednesday to make a brief hearing of 194 from the Senate and possibly take action if there's not any serious issues or questions. So I will begin this hearing with asking for a brief from our reviser, Mr. Long. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, House Bill 2282 is the House version of Senate Bill 194. The bills create new law that declares certain restrictive covenants on land conveyances to be void and unenforceable. This would only apply to certain covenants that restrict the use of property that is owned by a state educational institution. Those are, by statutory definition, the big six regents institutions. And the covenants that are targeted under this legislation are covenants that restrict the use of the property for some purpose other than single-family residency, and that are discriminatory, and that they restrict ownership or tenancy on the basis of race. And so if the covenants are that type, then those are the ones that are declared void and unenforceable as being against public policy under Section 1 of the bill. The House Bill 2282 does make special note of such covenants that are contained in any conveying documents that are dated between January 1st, 1948 and December 31st, 1958. I'm sure you have questions about why that specific date range, and I'm going to defer to the conferee to give you some background and context as to why that date range is in the bill. I will note Senate Bill 194 is almost identical legislation. It has been amended by the Senate Committee on Local Government, Transparency, and Ethics so that this new law that invalidates these covenants is only applicable to covenants within that date range, that 1948 to 1958 date range. And then the committee also amended the bill to make it effective on publication in the Kansas Register. So those are a few tweaks you'll see when 194 is referred to this committee and is heard on Wednesday. This bill is effective on July 1st if you go with this bill for enactment. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the reviser? Representative Pishney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jason, who brought the bill and why was the bill brought? I mean, is there a problem?
Yes, there is a specific problem. I'm going to defer to the conferee because I believe he can more fully explain what the issue is and what the bill is trying to address with that issue.
And is that being brought by or on behalf of a specific
institution? Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the reviser? For the reviser. All right, thank you, Jason. And I will open up proponent testimony of this august body. And that first person is Tom Cox, Vice President of Connected Nation Incorporated, also a previous member as a district representative in the House of Representatives not too long ago. Thank you and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate that. Both my short stint here, 4 years, feels like it was yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. And it's great to be able to have the opportunity to come back up here and stand in front of you. And as I served on this committee in my first term as well. My name is Tom Cox. I'm with Connected Nation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Kentucky that has spent the last 24 years working in the broadband space. We are not a fiber provider. We don't provide internet to the home. Our traditional services have been working with state broadband offices to ensure that when they receive grant funding, they're spending it efficiently and effectively to build to specifically rural communities and underserved communities, whether they're urban or suburban. We do a lot of digital training in communities, and then we also work on a certain type of infrastructure build called internet exchange points, which I'll get into in just a minute, which is what this project pertains to. You guys are fortunate, yes, with your advisor, with Jason, he kind of does 90% of my job for me because he's so good at explaining what the bill does and all the details of it. We are partnered to build this facility with Wichita State University on Wichita State's land. We received a $5 million grant through ARPA funding about 2.5 years ago to build this facility. And we discovered last summer that no one was aware, including the university, that there was an egregiously restrictive land covenant that both had significant racial restrictions, but also essentially made it so you could not build virtually anything but a single family house on this land that the university owns. The university acquired this land in the 1950s or 1960s. They acquired 2 parcels. They did not believe that there was a covenant on either parcel. Then one, they built the Phi Delta fraternity house down there. That did not have the covenant. This one, for some reason, it did get added to. So we looked into every way that how you can remove this. It was built in a way that you could only even review the covenant in the ought years. So 2030 would be the next opportunity to even review it. It requires well beyond a supermajority changes, and a significant over a quarter of the homes are owned as rentals or Airbnbs, and a significant amount of them by out-of-state LLCs. We've attempted to contact every single one of them as well. We've engaged with every household in the community. We went and knocked the doors, we hold community events. And so we found that it is literally impossible to remove it without a piece of legislation. So what an internet exchange point is, what we're building on the facility. It's about a 1,500 square foot building. And you'll see in the last page of testimony is a brief picture of what it looks like. This is where the internet physically interconnects with each other and exchanges traffic. So if you're at home and you want to access Netflix and you're on, let's say, Cox Communication, Cox has to go have your request is submitted along their fiber lines and it has to go to a physical building where Cox can talk to Netflix and it says, you know, I would like to view this. It runs to a data center, grabs that data, pulls it back, and then brings the data straight to you. This is where the physical interconnection of different service providers happen. If you're on Cox Communication and you're trying to send an email to someone at AT&T, well, they have to exchange traffic somewhere. So an internet exchange point is where that physical interconnection happens. The state of Kansas is one of 14 states that does not have an IXP in its border. That means 100% of the traffic that we submit on the internet leaves the state of Kansas, then comes back. About 80% of it goes to a building in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. About 20% of it goes to a building in Denver, Colorado. So there's a lot of issues posed by this. One is a resiliency effort or issue that we have no control over our infrastructure. The key infrastructure for our internet is based in 2 different states with different jurisdictions that we have no influence control over. If someone cuts a major fiber cable while they're, let's say, doing a dig, doing a road repair, which does happen frequently, they could cut off a huge portion of the state of Kansas from internet. And it can take days sometimes to figure out where that cut physically happened. Additionally, there is an aspect of cost. So the further you have to get your data to one of these facilities, the more expensive your internet becomes, especially for rural providers. Rural providers are and rural communities are greatest beneficiary of what we're building, which is why we're building in Wichita State centrally. Because those smaller service providers, they can't afford to run fiber from, let's say, Great Bend to all the way, or Garden City all the way to Kansas City. It doesn't make sense for a smaller provider. That it's, you know, tens of millions of dollars of build. So what they do is they connect to another fiber provider that has fiber. It may be AT&T, it may be Cox, or it may be a company like Windstream, these wholesale providers, and they have to pay them essentially per mile to connect out to the facility in Kansas City to access the greater internet. So the further that is, the higher the cost is. Additional, and then the last point is something called latency. We talk a lot about bandwidth. Bandwidth is how fast your internet goes. You know, 100 megs down, a gigabit speed. Latency is the distance your internet traffic has to travel. So you can have gigabit internet speed, but if your data is on a 400-mile round trip, it's still going to be slow. I don't know how many of you have experienced that you have high-speed internet and you're still trying to access streaming, you're on a Zoom and it's buffering or it's not loading right. And you're like, I have high-speed internet. You check it, you're like, I'm getting great download and upload speeds. That's latency. That's how far it has to travel. Fiber optic moves at the speed of light, but you can't make it go faster than the speed of light. So the only way to reduce latency is to reduce the physical distance your data is traveling. That's what this facility does. It creates a peering point for all this internet connection and exchanging of traffic to happen locally. So like I said, we received a grant from the Department of Commerce to build the first facility in the state of Kansas. And then we ran into this issue last summer as we were getting ready to break ground. The facility has already been approved to be built on this property by the Wichita City Council. They gave us a unanimous approval. We had unanimous approval through the Planning Commission. So this is our last potential hurdle in developing the facility. I will say one of the greatest beneficiaries of building this facility will be our school districts. Our school districts purchase something called E-rate. So it's a federally subsidized program for buying internet access. That's how our schools get commodity internet. In some parts of the state, that the highest cost, and actually I think it's Lake in Kansas, is paying a little over $11 a megabit for internet access. If you are close to one of these facilities, your cost per megabit should be anywhere between 10 cents to 30 cents a megabit. But they are in such a rural area and going so far. There are school districts just outside Wichita paying upwards of $8 a megabit, where there's districts in Kansas City on the Kansas City Metro are paying sub 50 cents a megabit for access for the same quality. So we actually did a project like this in Iowa. It actually started as where the Governor Reynolds hired us to essentially say, figure out how to make our rural internet better for school districts. All I'm hearing is we can't afford it. So we took 40 school districts, mostly rural, between Ames and Iowa City, formed a consortium, and went out and essentially built a version 1 of what we're building here. This is the perfected version. In partnership with other groups, and essentially said, okay, we're gonna form 40 school districts as a consortium, and we're gonna negotiate your E-rate as a group. They were paying, on average, about $3.94 a megabit, just by creating a peering point for them to, just for the school districts to buy internet locally. They dropped their rate to 30 cents a megabit as a consortium. That was just an overnight savings of millions of dollars to taxpayers by simply creating a single point where all the school districts could buy internet from. They were all buying from Chicago. So they were having to pay someone internet access to get to Chicago to buy internet for their school districts. So that's just one. I want to give you that concrete example of what the benefits of these facilities are. And that didn't even involve interconnection with all the cloud and content providers like Google and Microsoft, Meta, and Netflix. So that's the whole nother aspect of it. So I am here in front of you as Connected Nation in partnership with Wichita State University. This passed the Senate 40-0 with no opposition. Like the chairman said, it was Senate Bill 194. They did not get it read in time. And so I was very thankful to the chairman for holding an informational hearing on this. And like Jason said, there's only 2 changes. We added the word only to clarify that section 2 about the dates, specifically reference section 1, and then we changed it to publication in the register. You may be wondering about the dates. The covenant was signed in 1951. And we're trying to create this so narrowly tailored that this really does affect only this parcel of land in the state of Kansas. And so far, we cannot find any other parcel that falls under this criteria because we are not trying to open up any can of worms potentially. So we kept it to the date restriction. It has to include multiple aspects of language. It has to involve a racist covenant. It has to restrict to single family housing. Again, so to continue to narrow this down. And that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Is there any questions for Mr. Cox? Representative Pitney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am familiar with Connected Nation because of when I served on the broadband task force here in the state. So I'm very familiar with the company. My question is, the first part of this says owned by a state educational institution, and then that last part has those specific dates. Why, I guess my question is, why have we not made this specific to WSU and those dates? Why have we said owned by a state educational institution? Meaning that it could be other institutions, but it'd have to be within those dates.
I think the prevailing theory when we presented this, we sought advice from both revisor's office and we started on the Senate side and starting with the senators over there where it was easier just to, since Regent institution is defined in Kansas law, that just make a reference to that. And so that's kind of all encompassing there instead of calling out a single university. And also when we were drafting it, we didn't want to get into a situation where the other universities were like, well, why'd you only put them into statute instead of just referencing statute that already exists, which encompasses all of them. But we have engaged with the other universities and they all said, we have no issue with this. This doesn't affect us. So.
Couple follow-up questions, if I could, Mr. Chair. Another question related to that, were other properties sought out when this problem arose so that you wouldn't have had to be here in front of us to try to solve that problem?
Yes, we looked at every other available possible mean before coming as this is the option in front of you. There's a couple issues on that. So we looked at a few different properties to originally build this, and we chose this property 2.5 years ago, well, almost 3 years ago of actually picking the property before we sought the grant. Because what matters in building these facilities is they need to be proximate to a lot of fiber. 21st Street, which this is built on, so this is built on 21st Street facing which is a thoroughfare, not a residential street. And it has an absurd amount of fiber running through it. And you want that because they are physically pulling fiber into the building. So that makes the facility stand up faster, and that additionally reduces the amount of any disruption, because there's some on the opposite side of the street. So what we're doing is we're actually gonna bore under the street and put a conduit, so any fiber provider on the south side can just pull their fiber through. So we're not, because let's say you have 10 fiber providers that want to connect into this facility and they want to do 10 different builds, they're going to cut up the street 10 different times. So having all of them there, we're going to essentially do a single build where we're going to one time cut a line, put a conduit under there. So anytime on any side of the street, they can just pull under and pull over without having to create further disruption. Additionally, they have to pay for their own fiber getting into the facility. So the further you are away, the more providers may be like, we'll get this scheduled in years in the future, or you run into issues there. Now, when we ran into this covenant issue, every other parcel of land we looked at had been committed by the university elsewhere. So we did not have the option to pivot. Additionally, this is tied to ARPA funding, which has a ticking clock on it before the money expires. So we looked at opening it back up. The potential delays in that may run the clock out. There is also a fairly large $80 million middle mile project that from NTIA the state received. We were one of the few states to receive one of those grants to build essentially a internet superhighway from the IXP in Kansas City to our facility in Wichita, and then west towards through Dodge and I think to Garden City. But its real design is to connect the internet exchange point in Kansas City to internet exchange point in Wichita. And it runs down through Pittsburgh, Kansas. Well, that would pose a problem for that grant as well. So where they would have to review how that impacts them if we change locations of redoing their build and their design for it as well. So that's the I guess not so short version of why that we couldn't move parcels. We did review that and saw like what can we do, and there wasn't anything available that worked.
I guess my last is more of a comment than a question, Mr. Chair, if I can indulge. First of all, I appreciate your comment earlier with regard to your awareness of the need out in western Kansas, because that's certainly one of my priorities. And I believe that what you're saying with regard to Wichita does meet some of that criteria that we would be looking for out in our area. So I thank you for that.
And I will say, Representative, our long-term goal is, we want to build 125 of these across the United States. They are predominantly only built in major metros, like Kansas City size, and it doesn't need to be that way. That's just the way people said, oh, that's how you do it. Other countries don't do it the way the United States do. Other countries do it where they have a more what we call disparate network, where they're more localized to communities to create a dense web of interconnection instead of relying everything going to major metros. I equate it, our internet system right now is kind of like if you only had the interstate system. And so if your city wasn't on the interstate system, you're taking roads everywhere, not highways, roads. So you can imagine being in Garden City if there was no highways and you had to get up to 70 to connect anywhere. That's how our internet is designed. We're trying to change that so it's a dense connection of these facilities and highways interconnecting all of them to increase that speed. And there is nothing we could do for rural communities more effective in solving the broadband issue than building one of these facilities in the state. And long term, we would actually like to build one in Garden City. We'd like to build one in Hayes. We'd like to build one in Pittsburgh in the future as well, with Wichita being kind of the central hub and these being offshoots that, so you really, again, create that dense network of no one is that far from one of these facilities, and you create parity for the internet experience, and Lake in Kansas should be no different than the internet experience in someone in Kansas City.
Thank you for that. And I would just add, Mr. Chair, I think that's how this relates to local government as much as anything. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you come by the office the other day, and it's was good to talk to you then, and good to talk to you now, because we have a history of being neighbors on the floor. But anyway, I was just wondering, you mentioned the conduit under the street, and of course, like you said, any company can, run some fiber through there, but is there going to be any dark fiber in there, like for future, you put the fiber in now, maybe not be using it right away, but then later if you expand, you can energize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, people will pull dark fiber in here as well. So anytime someone's pulling fiber, so you have lit and dark fiber. Lit means that you're actively transmitting it because you transmit light. So that's why we call fiber lit. If there's data transmitting, it's actually light. If it's dark, it means the fiber exists, but no one's utilizing it. It's not powered, but it can be utilized in future builds. Yeah, companies will pull dark fiber into here as well. So the conduit system that the state is building that will pull into here is a 6-way conduit system. So it's 6 different microducts in a duct. And most of those initially will all be dark fiber as they're sold and leased out and lit over time. So yeah, this is designed, this is a, this facility's lifespan exceeds 40 years. I should say it's wind rated for a Category 5 hurricane or an EF5 tornado because it's critical infrastructure. So it can take a direct hit and should be fine. It's ballistic rated, so it's reinforced steel. So that's all the aspects of making sure that this critical infrastructure doesn't and can't go down. But yeah, absolutely, we're all about future proofing.
Okay, and that's all good. And so I assume it's going to be like on a ring. There'll be 2 coming in from 2 directions. So if one gets broken, it'll just go around the other way.
Yeah, that you're spot on. I forget that Representative Collins is a network engineer on his side hustle because he's asking all the right questions. Yeah, so we actually have 2 diverse manholes on the property, so people pull in from both directions. So if something got split one, we can run the fiber out the opposite way, so you're not losing connectivity. Because that's obviously critical. We can't have single points of failure. We also look whenever possible to pull power in from 2 different directions, from 2 different substations, if possible. so that if, again, one substation goes down, the other is still operating. But we also have a backup diesel generator on the property that only goes off if power goes down, and it can keep the facility running for about 2 weeks. So that's really important because let's say a major disaster happens to the region and the power goes down. Well, the hospitals have backup generators. They need internet access. So we need our power to keep going so we can continue powering internet operations for the region as well. So we have all that resiliency built into it.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering because, like, say, in my previous life, I had experience with a town of 8,000 people that was not on a ring, and someone was digging up their field, and it was not a pretty sight. Anyway, thank you.
You're exactly right, and that happens fairly frequently. A lot of this conversation started with the State Education Network, CANREN, which provides internet to our region institutions. They were the ones originally that came to us back in 2022 and said, hey, we've got this issue. We have to send all of our internet to Kansas City. It's getting more and more expensive. We're single threaded through that building. This is an issue for us. We know you guys want to build internet exchange points. What can we do to be high on your list? We're like, Wichita is one of our top 5 sites. They say, awesome, let us engage with people locally. And so in the last 6 months, CanRen has gone down twice. And let me say, they are a phenomenal organization. But one, I think it was they had a cut. And it was just like, okay, now we've got to figure out where that is. But Wichita State, their internet went offline. The surrounding area was fine because it's private internet, but WSU was like, well, I guess we're down for internet today. Does it come back in an hour? Does it come back tomorrow? But everything is so internet dependent that, that lack of resiliency is a legitimate risk. And we can get into, these are heavily supported by, military institutions, DoD, critical infrastructure as well, that they interconnect in these facilities as well.
Thanks, sir. Representative Wolf.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is ARPA funds that have to be used by the end of this year, correct?
Their expiration date is in 2026.
Okay, so you do have some. So will you be able to get all this done to utilize those? And if something happens that you don't, does this still go forward?
Yes. So our plan is to break ground next month, and then we will have enough time plus our buffering window for any issues. But so these facilities, we design them are modular. So they're actually pre-built in a factory. And then essentially there's very little construction on the site. We go in there because it's already level. We go in there, we do 2 6-foot holes to put manholes in, enough that you could go stand down in there and have a room around you. Then we put 2 concrete slabs on the property. And then it looks like you're just like, okay, is that all they're gonna do? And then a few months later, we show up and we have these units and we put them together like Legos, snap them together, interconnect inside, and then we turn the facility on. So it's pre-built elsewhere. So we actually already have it in construction. So we have done when we ran into this delay, we said, what is everything possible we can do to ensure that we don't run the clock out? And we are on time with a buffer on the back end in case something still happens. So that's not an issue. We just can't wait to revisit this next year would be the issue.
So you've used ARPA funds to build what you have that'll be ready to go on there.
Since we have not submitted reimbursements, we have the grant. It's a reimbursement grant, so we spend it and then we submit reimbursement. We have essentially put up covering the costs up till now to ensure that we're positioned with our engineering costs and everything, but we've not submitted any of that to the state yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Representative Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Cox, for the information. I did have a few different questions for you. You had mentioned this covenant that exists. I'd like to know who owns it, that covenant. Why has that not been amended through the covenant? And then can we get a copy of it before we work the bill on Wednesday?
Yes, I'm happy to send you the covenant. I sent it to the Senate committee members as well, so I can get that to you later today. Mr. Chairman, how would you best like me to distribute that? I don't want to create a COMA violation by sending it to the whole committee.
Why don't you if you could bring it to committee, is that okay? Bring it to committee. If are you gonna testify on Wednesday?
Whatever you'd prefer, sir. I'm happy to. I will be here. I'll be here whenever the day you said I'll be here.
All right, Wednesday is the day.
Okay. Well, and Representative, I can send it directly to you, and I guess if any other committee member would like to see it, I'm happy to figure out getting distributed. It's typewriter with some handwriting that's scanned. That it's kind of like we were like, what even is this thing? So yeah, I can get you a copy of that. Your other question. So the covenant is just a legal covenant that applies to, I think it's 30 parcels of land. So no one would own the covenant because the developer is long since dead and sold all the properties off. It's just the covenant continues to remain. And what we found when we went and knocked on the doors of the neighbors is none of them knew that this existed either. And it is, we found the neighborhoods around there, you know, goes back to redlining, that this was very common, fairly common practice back then. And this developer back in the 50s was fairly notorious for it. And so that is one of the things there. So we had 9 notarized signatures supporting removing the covenant, and we just ran into the problem where there's too many LLCs that own homes, and that it's a 30 parcel covenant. And there was no way to contact enough people to ever do away with it but we had 9 people actually take the time to get a notarized copy, said we would like to remove this as well.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, if you can email it to me,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome. The other thing is that there's 2 other questions I have, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. You mentioned to me last week when we spoke that there's some businesses already lined up, interested in economic development, and I wanted to find out who those businesses were.
Yes,
You
and
mentioned
I was going to
specific businesses.
I was going to circle back around with you because I discovered I can't say because they're in negotiations with the university and of bringing operations there, and so they're under what I am told is NDAs that prevent me from discussing them. I can tell you though that these are economic development engines. High-tech companies, anyone in the AI space, autonomous, whether it's autonomous factory, autonomous vehicle, drone companies, they have to base near internet exchange points because they need low latency. That's pivotal for what they're doing. So there are companies that have reached out to, if you guys aren't familiar with Wichita State's Innovation Campus, they are the best innovation campus in the United States. They actually bring private businesses to house on their campus and employ their students. Airbus North America's headquarters is on Wichita State's campus. Their other headquarters, their world headquarters is Toulouse, France. You know, second largest aircraft manufacturer or private aircraft manufacturer in the world, their headquarters on this campus, which then made Boeing say, well, we need an office there. And Spirit Aerosystems' office there, and Textron Aviation has an office there. It's absolutely crazy the amount they have. Deloitte built their first smart factory on this campus where they're doing automated manufacturing. NetApp, all these tech companies based there. Department of Defense, ATF has its digital crime labs on campus. I mean, it goes on and on. But so
I've got another question. So,
yeah.
I mean, we're kind of off topic right there, the question. So, quick comment real quick before I ask my next question. I have a high level of concern that you have NDAs with companies that you can't disclose to the legislators here who you're trying to get us to pass a bill, which may be good for lots of reasons, but that is a concern. So I'm just going to share that with the committee
I don't
here, 'cause I
have an
feel like
NDA, but that's
One moment.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with companies. We're dealing with location of a fiber connection. And I think you're getting a little bit off track. If you could kind of narrow it down to the focus of the purpose of this bill, we're not buying favor for anybody by passing this bill. If we do, we're actually allowing commerce to happen along an information highway. So if you could kind of
I do have a follow-up.
rail it in.
Specific, there is a picture of your facility. Can you describe what each of those units are and what they do in the picture, just to educate us on that, please?
Yeah, so if you look at the photo, and I can also send you some more pictures of what the facility looks like inside and outside. I have cuts of it that are, you know, open up and you can see, look top down into it. So the main one with the solar panels on top, that's the main facility. That's the internet connection point. It's about 1,500 square feet. That right there is about what we'd consider 3 modules of how, as we build the modules, so about 40 feet by 10 feet. That's about 3 of them there, and inside houses the interconnection space. If you looked inside of it, you would think like, oh, this is probably a data center. It's just very quiet. Because it's not doing storage and compute, but it's a bunch of racks, it's just doing interconnection. So that does not require a lot of power. This has a similar power profile of an average home. It doesn't, it's not like data centers that are megawatt facilities, which are loud and noisy and consume a lot of power. These, we're just pulling the same lines a residential home pulls into these. So you go in, it's nice and quiet because it's little panels where, you'd walk in there and you'd see a panel that says Netflix, say Google, say Azure, all these different companies, and it's where their fiber pulls in, and they can pull that fiber to the other companies and interconnect. We call this peering, where they interconnect with each other. Next to it, on the other concrete pad, those would be the backup generators, and then we'll have like underground fuel storage for those backup generators.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Thank you, ma'am. All right, any other questions? Any other comments for Mr. Cox? Okay. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And are there any other proponents that would like to speak to the issue of this bill? Not seeing any, I will move on to neutral. Is there any neutral testimony to be shared in committee today? And it's not an official hearing, but I'd still like to hear it. Anybody against this that would like to tell why? If you'd come to the microphone. All right, not seeing any. I will just remind that our committee that last year and the year before we dealt with some of these restrictive covenants that are either racially or culturally charged against people in a different time, a different culture time. And we were able to address those by making it possible for communities to go ahead and clean up their some of these issues. The company went out and took the trouble to get signatures to see if the people in that area wanted these changed, so that there was a weight and a impetus behind it too. But those covenants were already we made in law illegal to have in these added to these documents. And as these documents show up, people show up with another document that's got it in it. They're able to go to the public authorities and get them changed. This was a great opportunity for someone who collided with one of those covenants, a company that collided with those covenants that was going to try to provide service in a normal business fashion, to have to come to the legislature and say, hey, let's get this, we'd like to get this straightened out and get it straightened out in a public fashion. And without a whole lot of hoopla and fanfare, be able to cure something that we believe should have been cured. Could have been cured a long time ago, but shoulda, coulda, doesn't work. We're in the business of creating what is now and what is now legal, and what's the legal precedent now. So we appreciate the testimony. We'll have just a brief hearing for the sake of folks that will hear that it's going to be held this next Wednesday. And we'll just get a brief description from our revisor again, and any testimony that is wished to be given, and any questions that is wished as well. And then we'll probably take action on this on Wednesday. So appreciate the informational hearing and your time. And well worth it. Every question was well worth the time. So, are there any other things for the good? Any other questions or comments? If not, this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you on Wednesday.